time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebesta. I'm the co-founder of Retire Repurposed alongside Ben Tejas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe you're listening to us on the radio. Maybe you found us online. Regardless, head over to iTunes, find our podcast, click subscribe, and better yet, leave us a quick positive rating and review. If you would just take a moment and do that, we would appreciate that so much. Now, this podcast is all about retirement, but it's not about money. It's about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career, saving for retirement, having an identity, having a schedule, and then shutting it off on Retirement Friday without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. If you want more for your life and your retirement, then you have come to the right place. Well, on this episode, we continue our series on optimizing retirement. Today, we cover the idea of living with prosperity. The world, and even the dictionary, will define prosperity as financial success and wealth. The truth is, living with prosperity has more to do with your unique purpose and calling. In this podcast, Ben explains when you are in alignment with your purpose, your life is effortless while being the most impactful. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, we're back and we're continuing this series on optimizing retirement. And today we're going to talk about living a prosperous life. And we're going to go deep on this idea of really living with purpose, but more so living with prosperity. We're going to define that and have a really cool conversation. So I'm excited that you are joining us for today's show. Just a quick reminder, we got a brand new Facebook group called Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. Join a growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. Look for more tips on living repurposed, Facebook Lives, Q&A sessions. Just go to facebook.com and search Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. Ben Tejas joins me on the show. And Ben, this is episode number, it looks like 7 or 8 on this idea of optimizing retirement. Last week's show, we talked about the value of memories. And that was a great show. And it really has built upon this idea of if you want to have a great retirement, you got to have a great life leading up to retirement.
Yeah, certainly life doesn't begin or end at retirement. It's just life, right? I mean, we know that the memories early, that's what I loved about last week's show, is that earlier you make memories, that compound interest idea of how those memories pay dividends. So go back, listen to that one. And that to me really capped off that idea of just why do people today think that life begins or ends at retirement? It's just life, right?
One thing that you said last week I thought was interesting was that memories are kind of the dividends of life. You know, so many times in the financial world, we're talking about return on investment and stuff like that. There's more to life than just that. In fact, a couple of shows ago, we talked about how retirement is more than just numbers. There's a life aspect to not just retirement, but also our entire life. And it involves so many more deeper things. And this idea of memories, man, it's, we're at that point, Ben, where, we're not of retirement age. We're both in our lower 40s. But life does start to look a little bit different. I'll be the first to admit this. Once you hit kind of that middle age, I've become a little bit more sentimental in my days. I'm the first one to kind of throw out the kids' don't tell my wife. You throw out the kids' as like paintings or something like that.
We don't need that. Yeah.
Exactly. I don't want to have to store all of these old things. And the older I get, the more that those memories and thoughts of yesteryear are important. And I've heard people say by the time you die, really the only thing that you have left at that point is the memories of your life. And that's pretty sobering for everybody to hear.
Yeah, when you visit with people towards the end of their life, that's what comes up is those memories and those important people in their lives, and it's always the two together. And that's why I think it's important to just value those memories, because they are people, and those memories with those people are more important than anything, and get more important as you age.
Relationships, experiences, contributions. I heard somebody say that is really the impact of life. And you can invest your life and engineer your life to really focus on those things. Now you're on the right track to really, again, not just having a fulfilling life, but having a fulfilling retirement, because that's really the crux of what this show is all about. If you missed any of those shows, I can't encourage you to go back. We started several episodes ago talking about the ant and the grasshopper. We've talked about different ways to find meaning. We talked about the foundation of meaning. I mentioned we talked about memories and how retirement isn't all about numbers. If you haven't subscribed to our podcast, make sure you subscribe. Leave us a quick positive rating review. That's how people hear about our podcast. If you would go back, do those things, that'd be great. But if what we're talking about right here and you're new to the show, if that's resonating, make sure you go check out those previous episodes. All right, Ben, today we are talking about living with prosperity. This is, I would say, probably, I say this every show, this is one of the most important shows on how to optimize retirement. Being fully optimized, living kind of in congruence, with how you were created. That's really what prosperity is all about. So we're going to take a deep dive into this. Where do you want to start with this one?
Well, there's this, as we were talking about this show, this verse kept popping in my head, Jared, from 1 Timothy. It's 1 Timothy 6, kind of in the 17 to 21. And there's a part in there where it says, "Take hold of that which is truly life." And I think right off the bat, we'll define prosperity. But if you heard that, and you heard this show, and you heard living a prosperous life, and you went right away to the financial side, that's not necessarily what today's show is about. It's interesting, in that verse, early on in that chapter, and as that section of that scripture talks about the wealthy, and talks about how not to put your hope in that wealth, but then it comes right back and says, take hold of what is truly life. What we want for retirees is a prosperous life, where they're taking hold of who they're created to be and living that out in their communities.
We've also talked about, too, this old saying of, hey, a bad day of fishing. You've seen this plaque up at the cabin or wherever you go, but, a bad day of fishing, or maybe a bad day of golfing, you'll see that in the clubhouse lots of times, is still better than a good day at work. That's what we're trying to get away from. We're trying to get away from retirements that are living this true life that the Bible talks about. And again, we're going to get into what that means. But get out of this mediocre mindset that, hey, as long as I'm retired, as long as I can do what I want, which, whether it's impactful or not, as long as I'm not working, even a mediocre day in retirement is still better than a good day working. Unfortunately, Ben, I see that notion played out too many times in today's world with retirees.
That statement's so false, Jared. It just doesn't. It number one makes you think that your work is not good. But then secondly, and what we're talking about today is the side about, even if it's a bad day, it's still better. At least it's better than work. You hear people say, well, at least I'm not working.
Right.
And I think that's the type of thing that we want to get people past. Your retirement shouldn't look like just a mediocre time that's just better than work.
Right.
It should be the most impactful, best time of your life, and you should be living and walking into a very prosperous time of your life.
If you think that a bad day at retirement is still a better day, better than a good day at work, then my immediate question to you is, why did you work a job for so many years that you felt like the only way out was to retire? And that's a sobering question. That's kind of the heart of what we're getting at. Yeah, we're speaking to retirees here, but we're speaking to everybody, because this idea of prosperity is not just for retirees. But if that's your mindset, then we got to rewind the tape. Again, how we look at retirement may be affected by how we look at work. If we don't like work, and work is a grind, and I spent 35 or 40 years working a job that I hated, living a life that was not optimal, that's going to affect your retirement. You can't expect to have a suboptimal working years and then just walk into retirement and have it be bliss. There's going to be this element of mediocrity there, and we're trying to bust through that with today's show.
Yeah, we want people living this way now. If you're
Right.
listening to this in your 50s, I heard probably the saddest story I've heard in a long time. I don't want to depress anybody listening to the show today, but you need to hear this. It was just this morning I was visiting with one of the folks I work with, and he made a comment. He said, yeah, my neighbor is in his mid-50s, and he's been watching his dad's health decline. In fact, these last few weeks have been going downhill very fast. Mm-hmm. And they've been talking about this, and then sure enough, down the road, an ambulance showed up to the house. And he thought to himself, yeah, my neighbor just passed away. And here it wasn't the old guy, it was his son that actually passed away that day.
Wow.
He's 56 years old, and he had what made this story so hard is, yes, that he passed away, and actually his father then passed away the next day. But what made it the worst part of it, Jared, is so many conversations that my client had with this individual were, as soon, Dad, I'm going to be with him here to the end, and then I'm going to get on with my life here. I got to start doing some more things.
Yeah.
I got to start doing some more things. I've got to, and it certainly doesn't mean don't take care of your parents. We have to, and aging population, and we got to take care of our loved ones. But you have to be living a life now, because you don't know how long you have.
Yeah. Again, it goes back to this idea of life deferral, which we've talked about on the show many, many times. And again, the whole underlying idea here is trying to optimize your retirement, but also optimize your life. Let's get into the definition of what is prosperity. Ben, we've got our own definition that we're going to share. But what I thought was really interesting, I'm like, let's see what the dictionary says. Let's see what the internet says, because everything on the internet is true, right? So if you Google prosperity and look up the definition, here's what it says. It says successful in material terms, flourishing financially, bringing wealth and success. That is exactly not what that word means to us. Let's talk more about maybe some fallacies in that definition.
Well, yeah, like we talked about earlier, when I look at the Bible, it's interesting, and where we find truth is, money actually, in the financial side of what people would say is prosperous. There's some truth to that. You certainly need a certain level of prosperity in order to walk into the life that you were created to live, but it's not the most important thing. Mm-hmm. What we think the most important thing is, and our definition would sound more like it's living in complete alignment with your purpose and calling, mm-hmm. right? That, to me, it is far more prosperous. And actually, many times, the prosperity financially comes from doing just that.
Right.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But I think it's far, far more important to define what prosperity is, not on a financial basis, but more on a, am I where I'm supposed to be? Mm-hmm. Because I have seen so many people have the financial success,
correct,
but are not prosperous.
Yeah, and I that's just what I was going to say. We know, or I know, and I'm sure people out there listening know, people who have a lot of financial backing, and they're not fulfilled. You could argue they're not living a very prosperous life. I would argue that this definition we gave from the internet would be a very worldly definition. But again, our argument is that prosperity is not defined by wealth or financial success. And the opposite is true. You could know people who maybe don't have a ton of financial backing and a ton of money and aren't wealthy, but they're living insanely prosperous lives. I can think of people around the community who, you'll see them working at local restaurants and most likely making minimum wage. And you come in and they're happy and they're fun and they're outgoing, and you can just see that they have so much joy. You could argue that if they're living in that alignment with where God has them, with their purpose, with their calling, there's a fulfillment and a level of prosperity that they're experiencing that, quote unquote, the multimillionaire might not be if he or she is not in alignment.
Yeah, and I think there's certainly, and this may be a quick disclosure, some level of financial freedom, of course, allows, if you can get to that point, to allow yourself, where finances don't dictate how you live, that it doesn't dictate everything that you're doing, frees you up to walk through and into where you should be in prosperity. But far more important, like you said, I look at that person that is making enough, and they're
Right.
able to say that I'm earning enough to live my life the way I want to live it, and they enjoy what they're doing,
Yeah.
they're living in their purpose, that person many times looks more prosperous than somebody who just hasn't figured that out.
Yeah, and just going back to the financial freedom thing, that's another term that gets tossed around left and right in the financial field. Financial freedom, and immediately we go to financial freedom means I have 7-8 figures in the bank. Not necessarily. To me, financial freedom really goes back to what you just said, where finances might be a factor in the decisions we make, but it's not the factor. And that's why it's so important to be quote unquote financially free, because now all of a sudden we can focus on the prosperity side of life. So again, is it necessary? No, it makes it a lot easier, but make sure that the definitions of these words, that you have the proper definition. So let's talk about, how do you live with prosperity? Okay, so people at home listening right now, Ben, are saying, okay, I want to live with prosperity. How do I do it? What would you tell them?
Well, I'd say, first of all, you have to dig deep into who you were created to be. How did God wire your DNA, right? We're created for a purpose. We're created for a bigger calling. And we know that tends to be easier while we're working, I think, to see that and to serve people. But it doesn't certainly stop there. So the first step is, let's just decide and figure out who we were created to be.
Mm-hmm. It comes back to this idea of, being versus having and doing. I think so many times in life people say, I have to have a certain amount of money, then I can do the right thing, then I can become the right person. What we're saying is that prosperity is really about becoming first that person that God created us to be. We're going to live in alignment with it, which is how you defined it just a couple of minutes ago. I'm going to live in congruency, in alignment with that. And then what happens is that you actually start doing the things that you were created to do. And then many times by default, you start having the things that you want. They come naturally. It's not in the reverse order, which is how most of Americans put it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so many times when you ask a retiree, Jared, what do you do? You get back the answer, well, I'm retired. I've had that so many times. I'm like, no, I didn't ask you, are you working or are you retired? So don't come back with retired. When somebody asks you, what do you do? It should come back to something that came from who you are, right? So I'm doing this, whatever that is, because I am being who God made me to be.
Right. Yeah. I think part of being that person, or answering that question, Ben, when somebody says, what is it that you do, instead of just saying I'm retired, think about the outcomes that you can produce. If you can start to identify the outcomes that you can produce in people and in life, I think that's going to be a clue, for you to kind of figure out who you are and who you're wired to be, instead of saying, for example, like, I'm a retired teacher or a retired nurse. What outcomes do you have? I can inspire people in these age brackets. I can show people where they have potential in mathematics or reading or some sort of foreign language or something like that. I can bring out the musical talents in people. Now you're starting to you're getting closer to the outcomes. So I think if you're having trouble at home trying to figure out what your purpose or calling is, think of it in terms of outcomes. And by the way, we've said it 1,000 times, at retirement, that doesn't end. I think you're still called to produce outcomes in life and people, even at retirement.
Yeah, and I think if you're listening to this today, you're saying, I do want to dig deeper, and I want to figure out, who God created me to be and how I can take that into and through retirement. Look at some of the repurposed you materials that we have out there, right? I mean, there's a class that you and I did together where we walked people through that step by step, saying, here is how I would start. This is the steps I would take in order to make sure that I don't just, exist in retirement, but I flourish.
By the way, if you want more information on Repurpose University, you just go to our website, retirerepurpose.com. Okay, so Ben, to have prosperity, you got to know who you are, know your purpose, your calling. What's next?
Well, you have to engineer your life to be congruent with your purpose and calling. And that may sound like, well, just a simple thing. It's not, especially in retirement. So many times in retirement, we just kind of exist. I touched on that a second ago. I think, when you get in this mode of just kind of going about day to day, we've talked about this, how, every day feels like a Saturday, that mentality, if you don't have a plan, not only months, but years of your life will kind of tick away, and you'll be caught like, oh, what did I do in my retirement? Did I accomplish anything that was lasting and meaningful?
Intentionality, accountability on your time and your schedule. That's all coming to mind as we talk here, but it's really just kind of putting it into action. I think that there's a unification element when we can understand who we are, and then we start applying it either on paper, on purpose, whatever that looks like. That's when it really becomes powerful.
Yeah, and be ready to say no. There's so many times a new retiree works with us, and they start saying, "Yeah, I'm getting started with this and that," and it happened right away. Right after retirement. Take some time. Take that Sabbath moment to say, "Okay, I'm taking some rest. I'm really enjoying not doing anything for a little while because I need time to figure out, what is this new phase of life going to look like? Who was I created to be, and how can I make sure that now I'm able to engineer and make my life fit that. So there is time to do the things that you're called to do, because you will enjoy that way, way more.
And you're going to have the most impact as well. There's a guy out there by the name of Taylor Welch. He's a young guy, business owner, kind of a young up-and-comer, a mover and a shaker. But I heard him on a podcast one time recently, and he said this. He said, our greatest contributions to the world around us are made during our happiest and most blissful moments of our existence. Therefore, we have a moral obligation and duty to engineer those moments as frequently and routinely as we can. He goes out on a limb and says, not only should you do this, what we're saying, Ben, you're almost morally obligated to do it. We would say the Bible's telling you to do it. And then I challenge you to think about, what would the world look like if everybody lived like this? Holy cow, what would it look like?
If we had just an army of new retirees and people that have freed up their time, right, to make these contributions in their communities, the world would look like a completely different place, right? And I think the problem with that is we start to think, well, these guys are sounding like I can't enjoy my retirement.
Right.
It's the exact opposite. You're going to enjoy those retirement years, the golden years, as people always call them, so much more if you're walking into who you were created to be, and you're not simply looking at your hobbies and that what we talked about at the beginning of the show, that bad day of golfing and fishing, still better than work. I think if you're walking in and looking like a retiree that we're trying to help, the contributions are bigger, the restful times are better, and people are able to live out their very best lives in retirement.
There's another aspect of this that we haven't touched on. Not only are you having the most impact, you're having the greatest rest, you're having the most fulfillment, it's also probably the easiest. And I don't mean easy by it doesn't take a little bit of effort and work, but it comes so natural. I think that there's something so special when you kind of get in alignment. Everything, we keep coming back to that word, but when you're walking in alignment to how God has created you and where He's placed you, not only is it the most fulfilling, but it's one of those areas where you almost have the most impact with the least amount of effort. Talk about that for a second.
Well, yeah, I think sometimes we do get mistaken with easy versus effortless. I mean, there will be some effort to this. That's the best part, right? Anytime you get into exercise, I mean, feeling as if you're growing as a person, as you're getting stronger, as you're getting better day by day, it takes effort to do that. But that's good. Yep. We want to have that because, if you are not growing, you are dying. If you are not getting better, you don't just stay the same. And I think it's important that people look at this and say, I am actually enjoying the progress. I'm enjoying the process and progress of getting better in my life, not worse in retirement.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this conversation on living with prosperity in retirement. This whole idea of being in alignment with your purpose and calling, this doesn't start or end at retirement. It should be a continuation regardless of your working status or your age. So a challenge for everyone listening, no matter how old you are. Who are you? Who were you created to be? These are some tough questions. They're going to take some soul searching to figure out. But when you discover the answers to these questions, the key is to do it, to live it, and better yet, to become it now. Only then will you begin to experience this alignment and congruency that we're talking about. That is prosperity. Here's another challenge for you. Can you get to a place where you're so excited for the next day, you wish sleep wasn't a thing because you're so pumped for the next day. That, my friends, is the ultimate goal of living repurposed in retirement. If you'd like to learn more, get a copy of Ben's book, Repurpose: The Untold Story of Retirement in America, or better yet, go through Repurposed University. You can get more information by going to our website, retirerepurposed.com. Until next time, I'm Jared Sebesta. Remember, don't retire, become repurposed. We'll see you then.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.